My name is Maya. I'm 33 and for the last few years I haven't needed to work. My partner, Luca, has a good job and provides for us. I used to feel a little guilty about that. Then I learned to call it a luxury. To keep myself busy in the winter, I take contemporary dance classes. In the summer, I escape to our little coastal cottage 2 hours from the city. The cottage sits on a low bluff above the sea and is surrounded by a tall, weathered board fence that keeps the world at arm's length. Neighbors are few and far between. Privacy here is absolute. That privacy is everything to me. If I want to lie in the sun all afternoon, I do. If I want to grub around in the herb beds with my bare hands, I do. On warm days I'll strip down to a swimsuit and sometimes, when the sky is wide and I feel reckless, I'll sunbathe without one, half convinced the world has forgotten me. Mostly it does, but there is one vantage point I hadn't taken into account. A small balcony across the lane that belongs to an older man who rents the house next door. At first I didn't notice him. The balcony, with its crooked railing and potted geraniums, seemed empty. Then I began to see him there routinely, folding a newspaper, reading, smoking a pipe in the late afternoons. His name, when I learned it, was Daniel Rivera. He was in his mid-50s, silver at the temples, with a compact, athletic frame and a posture that suggested he'd once run rather than walk through life. There was a calm, deliberate air about him, like someone who measures time in exhalations. When I realized he could see into my garden, I felt uneasy the way you feel when you discover you've been humming aloud in the wrong room. But unease shifted. There was something curious in the way his gaze lingered, not leering but attentive, that began to thrill me. I'd arrange my towel with care, turn slowly while I watered the rosemary, deliberately hang my robes where he could see them. He and I exchanged the small neighborly things. A wave over the fence, a comment about the wind, the occasional hello when our paths crossed on the lane. His voice was low, patient. His eyes held a kind of assessment that made my palms go damp. One long, lazy afternoon, I walked into town for milk and a pack of cigarettes. The sun softened the edges of everything. Gulls made lazy loops above the harbor. A voice called my name, Daniel's, and he fell into step beside me, hands comfortable in his pockets. I was just heading for the bakery, he said. Walk with me. He had a smile that acknowledged what we both knew, but with the gentleness of someone who would rather speak in tea than in demands. We bought coffee, then loaf and returned to the bluff. Daniel invited me in with such ordinary ease. My wife's away for the week, he said, almost offhand. It's quiet. Sit. Have some tea. I should have refused. I should have reminded myself of the lines I had drawn for myself years ago. Instead I found myself following him up the narrow steps into his house, a place wrapped in teak and the scent of citrus oil. We sat on his terrace overlooking the little cove, and he poured wine like pouring stories, slowly, with intention. He talked about his work, landscape design, a passion that had him sketching edges of property like cartographers of feeling, and I listened, fascinated. There was a steadiness to his speech that made my own voice seem fidgety in comparison. As dusk folded itself into the bay, the conversation became quieter, the space between us smaller. I stood about to leave, and his hand found mine. It was a touch that didn't startle as much as steady the moment, warm, deliberate, promising something without needing to name it. He bent and kissed me. It was not the distracted brush of familiarity from Luca. Those were quick, practical pecks that fit between schedules and errands. Daniel's kiss was patient, like someone taking time with a book he loves. It held a question and an answer at once. It made the hours beyond it feel porous and full of possibility. We slipped backward into his house without maps and without rules. The night held us in a long, soft private orbit. He seemed to understand the geography of making someone feel seen, where to speak, where to be silent, how to let a look last. When I left before dawn with the salt of the sea on my skin, I felt untethered and luminous. After that night, I found myself drawn to the cottage with a new hunger. I told myself it was the light, the sea air, the dancing time in my body finally unclipped. But the truth was simpler. In Daniel's company I felt wanted in a way that had nothing to do with convenience or kindness. It had the sharp, intoxicating edge of being observed and cherished. He began to visit the garden more often. We fell into a rhythm of stolen breakfasts, a shared cigarette on a back stoop, a hand finding mine at the edge of a picnic table. Each encounter felt like both a promise and a countdown. Guilt threaded through my days like a thin strand of seaweed, but I learned to braid around it. Luca began, innocently, to suggest we sell the cottage. He thought it was unnecessary, an expense for something I only used to sunbathe. His words collapsed me into panic. How could I tell him that the cottage had become more than a plot of land? That in the wooden floors and the rosemary beds I had found a piece of myself I thought had been smoothed away by years of polite contentment. The idea of losing the house was a raw, immediate grief. I know this can't go on forever. Every time Daniel arrives, I carry in my chest the awareness that what we do is fragile, improvised on thin air. I chastise myself aloud. I am unfaithful, selfish, reckless. And yet, when I see him, the world narrows and everything except the warmth of his hand slips away. I count the minutes until the next cup of tea, the next quiet laugh, the next moment when someone looks at me as if I were new. Home, for me now, is complicated. It is where I have allowed myself to be seen and, in that exposure, to be rediscovered. I have tangled myself in desires and regrets, and both are honest and real. Some part of me knows the inevitable ending will arrive like a tide. It will come, perhaps when Luca decides to sell or when shame becomes too heavy to carry. Until then I cling to these afternoons like driftwood, buoyant, imperfect, and entirely mine.